a typical hunting rifle, which is used for deer or boar or stuff like that, is a lot more powerful than this evil black rifle.
We need to know the difference between automatic and semi-automatic.
You have to join an organization which is licensed. These are used in the making of movies, and as you know, Malta has quite an industry in film industry.
It's even when we do go to the range, we have to go to the range by the quickest route, most direct route. We have to go back home by the most direct route.
But before we go to that, let's tackle the assault rifle.
No, you either are responsible enough to own and use a gun safely, or you're not.
2 rocket launchers. I own them. They are mine. They are part of my film armory.
There's no such thing as an accident with a firearm. Someone was negligent with a firearm.
Have no interest, know nothing about shooting, but want to write about shooting. By all means, journalists, come over to the range, try it out, see what it's all about.
And collective punishment is a tool used by totalitarian states. They're really 4 really basic rules. Anybody can follow them. There's absolutely no excuse for hurting with a gun. Now, a semi-automatic firearm is one which shoots 1 bullet every time you pull the trigger. So you can pull the trigger once, 1 bullet comes out. A fully automatic firearm is a gun which, if you keep the trigger pressed, it keeps firing until it's empty. In sporting disciplines, we only use semi-automatic firearms. Fully automatic aren't used. But, there's this incredible misconception when people see a gun visually, a fully automatic and a semi-automatic firearm are very, very similar. I mean, an untrained person can't even tell them apart. Even I couldn't tell one apart at a glance. You have to look at small levers on the side and stuff. So semi, you pull the trigger once, even if you keep it pressed, only 1 bullet's going to come out. If you want to shoot again, you got to release it and pull it again. Fully automatic, you press the trigger, keeps firing until it's empty.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's in Malta you can't attain a fully automatic weapon.
Well, for sporting purposes you can't. But as a collectible under certain very strict conditions you can. Having said that, you can never use it. You cannot take it to the range and, shoot the machine gun. It's not done.
And what else, Steve? For it to be a collectible.
Let's tackle, but before we go to that, let's tackle the assault rifle, because this is the term which we love to hate, which is absolutely abused by the media because they don't understand it, or else there is a political agenda to mention it. Let's put it this way. So, what is an assault rifle? An assault rifle is a firearm which has the capability of shooting either semi-automatic or fully automatic. So it has a selector switch. So it is the user who determines if he's going to fire single shot, semi-automatic, or fully automatic. It will have a detachable magazine, and it will fire what is known as an intermediate round. Those 3 elements make up an assault rifle. Now, assault rifles are not used by sports people. So, in what Clive has mentioned before about IPSC, they do not use assault rifles. They use semi-automatic rifles. In shape, they may be the same, as Clive said. And this is something which is very important because a lot of the hype is about looks, not about the actual reality. And this is where it breaks down, because when you talk about something because of the way it looks, then the subject just loses sense. It's about what the firearm is. So an assault rifle is not used in sport. When it comes to collectible firearms, because we can go into that later, what form of licenses exist. But when you're talking about automatic firearms, which are military firearms, incidentally, A, they are not used in sports, and B, the only way you can have them is with a collector license. And now, following the recent changes to the directive and to our laws, it's with what is known as a collector license A special. It's only with that license that you can acquire these automatics. And the automatics that you can acquire have to be either of pre-1946 manufacture or rare, or historical, or artistic. I can qualify each of those terms. I can explain what they are. But basically, that is it. It doesn't mean that if there's an automatic for sale, anybody can go and buy it. It's very, very restricted.
Mm-hmm. Steve, how many ranges do we have for pistol and carbine shooting?
Currently licensed, there's the range in Gozo, there's the range in Honda, and for rimfire, there's another range which is on the coast road. So basically, it's just that. It's quite limited. What everybody is hoping for is the completion of the National Range project, because that will change the scenario entirely. As you know, the first phase for trap and skeet shooting has been completed. Unfortunately, the largest group of shooters, which is the target shooters, so pistol and rifle shooters, still do not have a decent place where to practice. However, I am informed that the second stage, the second phase of the project is soon going to be launched, which is the dynamic ranges. Obviously, Clive would be very happy with that.
Yeah, perfect.
And the 25, 50 meter ranges for static shooting.
For the past few years, I've been regional director for something called IPSC, which stands for International Practical Shooting Confederation. Now, it's a very large organization. It's present in over 100 regions worldwide. And in Malta, I'm quite happy to say that it's probably the fastest growing and most active, especially handgun discipline there is. Over the past 3 years, we've started going abroad, representing Malta at the European Championships, World Shoots, and lots of what we call level 3 matches, which are pretty big matches overseas. Well, IPSC is basically, it's a race with a gun. You've got a stage, you've got a number of targets, a different number of targets from stage to stage. You're limited by barricades and fault lines on the ground, and it's up to each shooter to decide how he's going to shoot the stage and to shoot it in as short a time as possible, with as high a number of points as possible. At the end of it, we take your points and divide it by the time you take to get those points.
That's fun, man. That's really good fun.
It's a massive adrenaline rush.
Every when do these events happen locally?
In Malta, we meet every weekend. Every single weekend, rain or shine. I don't think we've ever missed a session. And we're quite proud of that. So
nice. You were just abroad, though?
Yes, we were a team of 4 people. We went to Vienna for something called the SCW Trophy, the Sportschützenclub Wien Trophy. It's a match which is held every year. It's very popular, over 300 shooters, mostly from Central Europe. We always try to take new shooters who are interested in going overseas to this particular match, because it's really well organized. It's quite straightforward. It's very technically challenging, but it's not too overwhelming. And it's very convenient, because just to fly to Vienna, it's a 2.5 hour flight. Vienna Airport, they're very used to firearms passing through the airport.
I was going to ask, is it a problem to travel with firearms?
I wouldn't call it a problem. There's just a bit more paperwork involved. So, especially locally, you've got to book a police escort to get the firearm onto the plane, and you've got to inform the airline from beforehand. But other than that, it's quite okay.
We ever had anything like it in Malta?
Unfortunately not, because we simply don't have the facilities to host that kind of activity, that kind of event. I mean, to do that, you have to have an IPSC match. It consists of a number of what we call stages, and each one is different to the other. And the typical big one would have something like 15 stages. To have 15 stages, you need a pretty big range. And in Malta, we simply don't have that at the moment.
So you need 15 little bays or little stages
pretty much, yes,
to complete
a good level 3 match.
And at the moment, we have
one
day.
We work miracles with that one, I can tell you, but it's still one. At any one day on the range, for an IPSC session, because that's what I can talk about, you're going to have men, you're going to have women, you're going to have airline pilots, you're going to have surgeons, you're going to have engineers, farmers.
Yeah.
This is off my head, all the people I know, people who work in banks, diplomats, you're going to find teachers, nurses, you're going to find everything. So it's really, you could get the group of IPSC on a Saturday and there's, out of those 20 people, there'll be most of the professions represented and most of the straight of society. And you don't need to come from a certain part of society to enjoy yourself. At the end of the day, you're a shooter. The only thing we care about is that, number one, you're a good sportsman and you're not a cheat. And number two, you're really safe. That's the only thing we care about. We don't even care whether you're a good shooter or not. Yeah. We're really not interested.
Safe.
When people come for the first time for IPSC and they tell me, I'm really new, I look like an idiot. I tell them, no, you won't look like an idiot. You know why? Because for the first 3 or 4 times, we won't even take score and won't even take time. Because I don't want you to try and race with
Under
me.
pressure? No. Yeah.
When I see that, you're doing well, then we'll start taking the time.
That's the way.
How many collectors and how many shooters do we have in Malta? Let's say license holders.
Yes.
License holders is the correct term, because what we know is the number of licenses that are issued. And again, the information which I'm providing is not based on today's figures, because I believe the last time I looked at that must have been about just over a year ago. But the shooting community in Malta is quite vibrant, quite active. And if you take the target shooting license A and the target shooting license B together, and now there's the third type, which is the target shooting license A special, you're looking at a community of about 6,000 persons.
All right.
If you look at collectors, it's much smaller, and this is the trend wherever you go in the world, because collectors is a far more limited number of people, and that should be somewhere, I would say, under 1,000, well under 1,000.
And this does not include the licenses held for hunting shotguns.
Of course, because that would take the
that's
number
something
of...
else.
That is something
Exactly. That's something
completely
else.
separate.
Yeah.
There could be a third reason why someone would purchase a firearm, and I'm sure it's not the right reason, and that would be self-defense. You can't just...
Let me clarify this, Mark. We have a very robust law. It's very sensible, but very robust. And it's unlike other legislation in the other European countries where it's existed and it has gone through various changes. We repealed the old arms ordinance and we introduced a completely new law based on the European directive, which means our law is far more, I would say, far more extensive, and in it we inserted whatever possibilities there could be. However, the licenses are very clearly defined. The only licenses that a Maltese citizen can get is either a target shooting license, which is specifically for sport shooting, or a hunting license, which again is specifically for hunting, or a collector license, which is for collecting. That's it. So there is no such thing as a license for self-defense. Having said that, the law allows the Commissioner of Police enough leeway to grant a person with, obviously there must be sufficient grounds for that, to grant that person a license to keep a firearm for self-defense. But that does not come out of the law. That comes out of the fact that the law allows a certain amount of discretion to the Commissioner of Police. But the license which are in the law, part of the law, are the three I mentioned. So you're either going to be a target shooter, or a hunter, or a collector. That's it.
In fact, if I may, our law specifies even how we store the firearm at home. It's got to be locked up. Third parties can't have access to it. The ammunition has to be stored separately. When you're going to the range, it's got to be locked away. You're not going to, stick it into a holster and walk out of your house. So people do have a lot of misconceptions about this. Even when we do go to the range, we have to go to the range by the quickest route, most direct route. We have to go back home by the most direct route. If we want to stop off at the supermarket to do some shopping on the way back from the range, we can't.
Definitely.
You're not going to leave your gun in the back of your car. And so, anybody who's thinking about getting a license, to keep it at home on his comodina and that sort of thing, no, just don't bother. That's not what the law is designed to do.
If someone wants to join the club, if someone wants to try the sport, can you shoot as a non-licensed shooter, at least to try, legally insured? What would the 5 rules of safety be to them? What would you tell them? And are there some kind of training courses which they can do? Because you can watch YouTube, you can dry fire.
Could I touch on this, since it's
definitely
very sport shooting related?
These procedures, those are for you, Clive.
Yes.
What I will say though, if you don't mind, and it's like an introduction that you can carry on. It's how do you get into it? First of all, you can go and practice. If you don't own a firearm, you can go and practice, you can have an insurance for the day, and you can do it under the supervision of an RCO, a range conducting officer. That is possible. However, if you want to own a firearm for sport shooting or for collecting, then the first thing you have to do is you have to join an organization which is licensed by the police, and then you would have to undergo a course, which is obviously tailored for whatever you're choosing.
Of course.
Once you pass the exam at the end of the course, the club will give you a letter of recommendation, and with that letter of recommendation, you will visit your local police station and apply for the corresponding license. You are then called to an interview by the weapons board, and if you pass that second stage, that second level, you will then be recommended for the license by the Commissioner of Police, and that is the third level. So effectively, it's 3 tier. And that's how you get into the system. Now, the rest I will leave to Clive.
Initially, when the firearms laws were first introduced, the only way you could shoot a gun was to get the license. So people would have to join a club, go through the process, get a license, buy a firearm, go to the range, and sometimes discover that it's not really for them. After that had been going on for a few years, and there were no problems whatsoever, changes were introduced, and nowadays, as Steve said, you can try it out for a day. You have what we call a taster session. You go with a licensed range officer. You'll be insured, third-party insurance, which is required by law, and you try it out. If you enjoy it, then that individual, I do quite a lot of this, I take lots of people for their first time. Then if they show that they want to go on with it, I recommend them to the club. Because even to join a club, to join our club, you need a form of introduction. Now, if I introduce that person, I will have done that first initial vetting. Then that person goes into the club, does the course, carries on, and might be issued a license if everything is in order. If you've got a criminal record, don't even bother, for example. I mean, it's not going to happen. You're not going to get a license. I mean, in fact, you'll probably be called in to be questioned as to why you actually want to have a license, But, I mean, people with criminal records don't come to us, obviously. And then, beyond that, you can either learn as you go along, or you can go to people who can teach you. But that's for people who already have a license. I mean, I do a fair amount of instructing myself. Sometimes we bring instructors from overseas, especially in IPSC, I mean, a couple of years back, we got the reigning European champion, which was pretty nice. And he gave us a couple of days of really good, intense training. So yes, there is room to grow and develop, to take it as far as you like. And one thing which is very good about our system is that it does not focus on the firearm. It focuses on the person. Because you find many countries with really flawed laws, with really flawed firearm laws. They say, okay, you can have this kind of gun, but you can't have another type of gun. And many times the difference between them is cosmetic. One is made of wood and blued steel, and it looks nice and classical. And another one has plastic and is black, the black gun, the evil black rifle, they call it. It's a bit of a joke in the firearms community.
Yeah.
But, I mean, when you look at the figures, a typical hunting rifle, which is used for deer or boar or stuff like that, is a lot more powerful than this evil black rifle. So in Malta, we didn't fall into that trap. In Malta, we said, okay, if the focus is totally on the person, and if a person is sorted, then he's given a license. There are some people I wouldn't trust with a bowl of wet spaghetti. I mean, let's be honest. I'm not going to say you can have this type of gun, but not that. No, you either are responsible enough to own and use a gun safely, or you're not.
Clive, what would your top 5 safety rules be?
Okay, the one thing I tell people when I'm instructing, the first thing they have to do is forget everything they've ever seen on TV or on YouTube or in the movies. That's 99.9% wrong.
For sure.
And these basic 4 rules are the rules we all live by. And number 1 is we always treat a gun as if it were loaded. Number 2, never point a firearm at something you're not willing to destroy. Whenever you pick up a gun and point it at something, you've got to ask yourself the question, can I live with the consequences of shooting this object? So, even when you're at home, we train a lot at home with empty guns. There won't be ammunition in the room, really checked multiple times that they're empty. But even though we know the gun is empty, you are not going to point the gun in an unsafe direction. You're not going to point it at a door, because a bullet can pass through a door. You're not going to point it out of a window. You certainly aren't going to point it at your pets. Even when you're at the range, you don't point it up at the sky, because what goes up must come down. Third rule is finger off the trigger until you're on the target. And the fourth one is, to be aware of what's behind your target. Our targets aren't bulletproof, bullets pass through them. To be aware of what's behind your target, around your target, have a bit of awareness. And if you follow those 4 rules, it's impossible to get hurt. Even if you break one rule, if you follow the other 2 or 3, you're not going to get hurt. So when you hear of somebody who put a bullet through his leg, or God forbid, through somebody else, so he had his finger on the trigger and he pulled the trigger. He shouldn't have, because he wasn't aiming at the target. He wasn't treating the gun as if it were loaded. He was pointing it at something he didn't want to destroy. He broke 3 rules. And Allah Ibirek, quite touchingly, everybody hurts themselves with an empty gun. Oh, I thought it was empty. Well, it probably is empty now. And you've got a hole in your leg. So they're really 4 really basic rules. Anybody can follow them. There's absolutely no excuse for hurting with a gun.
And then there's the gun that goes off on its own.
Oh, yes, of course. I mean, I don't know. You can leave a gun on a table for 100 years loaded and nothing's going to happen. Guns don't fire themselves. People, I mean, it's nonsense. Guns don't fire themselves.
Steve, Simon, you're all right?
I'm all right.
Cool. Any questions?
No, I'm just listening and following.
Steve, I saw this post on Facebook, an article. It was written by a Malta site, guide something.
Okay.
I can't remember.
Okay.
Yes.
I tried to find it, but I couldn't find it.
It was pulled off.
It was pulled off. All right. There was a mention of 4 shockingly deadly weapons registered in Malta. Rocket launchers, mortars. Are these legal in Malta? Blah blah blah.
First of all, let's not go into the journalistic merits of that article, because it was absolute trash and it was pulled off. Again, in order to answer that accurately, first of all, you need to know one thing, that whatever firearm is imported into Malta and whatever is in Malta is registered with the police. So the police have a register of every firearm. If a firearm is in my possession and I'm transferring it to Clive, that firearm is picked off that register and placed in Clive's register. So the police have an absolute clear picture of where firearms are. Now, the police register, includes all types of firearms. Regrettably, in the past, there were certain types of, and I can't call them firearms because these are not firearms. I'm talking about airsoft, for instance, which in the past used to be registered. So those toys, let's call them toys, formed part of the police register until they were pulled off. Prior to the 1st of March, antique flintlock muskets, antique percussion muskets were also part of that register. Air guns or also, and even until now, part of that register. Now, these firearms and these objects are not on the registers of other European member states. So what happened was that the figure, the ownership figure in Malta was extremely high compared to these other countries, because it included things which those other countries never registered and were never intended to be registered.
Toys.
We are still getting there, because there's still air guns which is included, where other countries do not include air guns in their registers. So the article was based on this information, which is, every now and then it happens. Somebody in Parliament stands up and asks, how many licensed firearms are there? And then there's this huge list. And this huge list initially used to include things like airsoft mortars and airsoft. And whoever doesn't know what that is would imagine something really dangerous. And these are toys, actually. But in reality, when you break it down to the firearms, our ownership, our level of per capita ownership is very, very much the norm. Okay, very much the norm. The items obviously include collectible firearms like the antique machine guns, but again, being held under a collector license. And interestingly, it also includes film props. So this famous rocket launcher, these always come up. There are always these 2 rocket launchers.
Yes. It's got a catchy
Yeah,
name.
I own them. They are mine. They are part of my film armory. Right. So what? I mean, we don't take them to the range to use to shoot IPSC. I mean, that would be interesting, but we don't. These are used in the making of movies, and as you know, Malta has quite an industry in film industry. It's thriving, and quite a few big movies have been shot in Malta, and I'm very happy to say, very proud to say that we have supplied a lot of these movies with firearms and rocket launchers and cannons and whatever. Yeah, but that's a film armory. They are not for sale to third parties. And this article was all about this, and it was all misinformation. And whoever wrote it obviously can't tell the butt from the muzzle of a gun. And like unfortunately happens with a lot of journalists, they write about everything, but they don't even bother to do some serious research and speak to the people who are directly involved. So what comes out is an absolute mess. But the figures are pretty normal. And then there's another interesting aspect to this. Let's not just look at Malta, because, okay, we are talking about gun laws in Malta, but you have to see this in the wider context, in the European context. Now, our gun laws are probably the most sensible that there are in Europe. And in fact, even during the debate of the directive, our laws were mentioned more than once. Some countries actually pick some of the procedures that we've installed in our system, and they've adopted them. So that much I can tell you. Which is the country which has the highest per capita ownership of firearms in Europe? I'm not talking about European Union, I'm talking about Europe. Switzerland. Switzerland has the highest per capita rate of firearms ownership. It also has the lowest rate of crime.
That's 45%, no, I think.
I forget figures.
It's extremely high.
It's high.
I think it's 1 gun for every 2 people.
It's high. Let's just say it's high, because I don't remember the exact figures. But what is clear is that there is no link between legal firearm ownership and criminality. That is a very important point to remember.
I agree, 100%.
So in Malta's case, we are more or less in the same situation.
Yes.
We are not as high as Switzerland, nowhere near that figure, but with the firearms that we have, the per capita figures, crime rate is still very low. And again, when there's crime, the firearms that are used
are generally unlicensed.
Of course. Unlicensed. If I may, because I think this is a very important point, the sad reality is that legislators, when it comes to firearms, have always tackled it in the wrong way. The majority have tackled it in the wrong way. The principle, first of all, they do not study the statistics, or otherwise they have an agenda and they are not interested in the statistics. But in reality the reality is that when you permit, under obviously certain requirements, certain regulations, once you permit ownership, the chances of criminality are decreased, not increased. And that's facts, figures. And as Clive said previously, in our law, the most important aspect of our Arms Act is that it is based on the person rather than the object. So you'll find that a lot of laws lose a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of vital police resources, because this gun has a butt of this shape and this gun has this grip, and they have to differentiate. When it's nothing about that, it's about the person. You either trust that person or you don't.
Correct.
So if that person qualifies, then it's okay. And when they start going out with bans, you immediately see a surge in illegal firearms. That's what happened in Australia.
Yes.
Some people will say no, but that's what happened in Australia.
Yes.
And it's what happens in the United Kingdom as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the United Kingdom, their violent crime rate is particularly high at the moment. Firearms laws are very, very restrictive in the UK, but their violent crime rate is several times higher than that of many other European countries with much less restrictive firearms laws. So, I mean, they're barking up the wrong tree, which is a pity because, you want to minimize crime, that sort of thing.
People like to compare London to New York.
Yes. I saw that stat of knife crime at one point.
Homicides.
There were more homicides in London than there were in New York, which was ridiculous.
Both cities have 8 million or 8.5 million people, so it's very easy to compare. And it's the first time London
surpassed.
Exactly.
Both cosmopolitan, both.
You know how many there are legal firearms in London? 1.86 million.
In London?
Yeah. In UK.
In UK.
Okay. But that's an irrelevant figure, really, isn't it? Because none of those firearms are used in crimes. The crimes are all.
Exactly.
There were many more firearms in the UK, and there were a couple of very serious crimes committed, and the British state reacted by clamping down on legal firearms owners. And then there's, of course, the issue of collective punishment. I simply cannot understand how a liberal democracy like the UK or more recently New Zealand, which has been in the news in the firearms community, can engage in collective punishment with a straight face. And collective punishment is a tool used by totalitarian states. Collective punishment was seen in Nazi Germany, in Soviet Russia, in fascist Italy, and the concept is so alien to the idea of liberal democracy, where people's rights are protected, that the mind beggars belief. When it comes to firearms, they seem to throw all these niceties out of the window, which is it's a very serious issue which goes beyond firearms ownership.
Do we see any clear factors which say if we're more lenient on gun laws, people own more guns, then crime rate is going to go down? I mean, we can say it by seeing, other countries.
We've got to be careful. It cuts both ways. Correlation is not necessarily causation. So, as Steve said, there are many states in the United States where firearms laws are extremely liberal, practically everybody has a gun, and violent crime rates are very low. Then there are the states where, laws are extremely restrictive, or like the United Kingdom, and violent crime is high. It's a good deal higher than those countries than those states where firearms are quite easy to get hold of. But it's a very complicated subject because there are so many factors feeding into it. You can't say more guns equals more crime, or necessarily more guns equals less crime. What you can say is that the number of guns might have got absolutely no link whatsoever to the amount of violent crime. Although, anecdotally, you can make the argument that if a criminal knows that his potential victims are not totally defenseless, logically one would say that he would think twice. Because, if I were a criminal, I would certainly think twice. It's not just a question of firearms ownership, it's also a question that the law then protects the victim. The victim is not the criminal who got shot while breaking into a house. The victim is the original victim, the little old lady the little old widow who's, alone at home, and this great big man breaks into a house to beat her up and rob her. She does a pistol and she shoots him. So she is the victim. Now, if the laws protect those people, that makes quite a difference. So it's a philosophical concept, isn't it, of the right to self-defense, and that it goes beyond firearms. In fact, it's a concept which is valid with or without firearms. Some people don't believe in it.
It's good that you mentioned it, because recently I told my parents that I've applied for my gun license. So up and coming in the next few months, I'll be doing the final stages of the license, as you mentioned. First looks I got to it, oh no, you might get into something bad. They looked at me like I was planning to rob a bank.
Yes.
And it's such a misconception about weapons, Just about the firearm. Okay, because you're right in correcting me there, because a firearm doesn't mean it's a weapon. Anything can be a weapon. So that I got looked at in that sense, it just felt wrong. I know that Mark's been pushing me for years to just join them and come and
push her. How can you look at yourself in the mirror?
It's actually he just teased me a little bit. I followed every single time. You see, so he just showed me once.
Well, to be honest, it would probably be cheaper if you did drugs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just by the initial stages of getting my license, and obviously I walked to the gun shop and I said, I didn't buy an airsoft, just an airsoft.
You already started spending your money.
I already started spending my money. I'm not even licensed yet, so I'm starting to see the...
Because I just plant seeds.
Yes. It's very big.
I let them grow.
The airsoft is the entry drug, isn't it?
That's it. Actually, Battle Max is the entry drug.
Battle Max
Airsoft is second stage.
Yes.
Non-licensed shooting would be third stage, and then this is like the fourth.
And then he'd be horribly hooked, and you'll be living in a cardboard box pretty soon.
Clive, you mentioned the expense, because as a hobby it is, as a sport, it's definitely expensive, because I think it is one of those sports where a budget, financial help would really push you.
Well, that's a pretty sore subject, really, because we'd like to see greater levels of support, especially on an international level. There's only so much you can do. What is so beautiful about my particular discipline, for example, is that 2 weeks ago I was shooting in Vienna. I was in my same squad. There was the current European champion. He's an amazing shooter. He's on my same squad. We're on first name terms. There are very few sports in which you're going to be shooting alongside the world champion.
It's like you're playing football and Ronaldo's
exactly on your team.
He's on your team.
And there I was, with this chap, Greg Midgley. He's an amazing shooter. But he's also a professional shooter. And I shoot, by Maltese standards, I shoot a lot. I probably get to something like 30,000 rounds a year, which is just an insane amount.
Insane.
Yes. But he gets through, I don't know, over 150,000 a year. He stops counting anyway. Now, so on the one hand, it's really nice because you're racing alongside the very best the world has to offer. On the other hand, it can be a bit of a downer because you're not going to beat him. Now, I always tell people, move out from Malta. Don't be a big fish in a small pond. Go out, dip your toe in the big sea out there. You'll learn a lot. You'll have a lot of fun. It's a very social sport. Shooters are very friendly, Last year when I was at a match in Germany, my gun broke. And the amount of offers I got from other shooters to lend me their gun so I could finish the match. These are the top champions. Here, Clive, use my gun. You can shoot it. I've got a spare gun. Use my spare gun. It's really nice. But, we are really limited in Malta. We are limited both by the facilities, but also by the support. When we go abroad, for example, we shot the World Shoot. We shot the Europeans in 2016. We're going to shoot the Europeans again this year in 2019. The team has to pay for its flights, has to pay for its hotel, the registration, the ammunition. You easily end up spending $1,500 on a match. And that's quite a lot. And when people are flying the flag, we'd like a bit more. support, really.
It's unfortunate because you do it for the love of the sport and
Yes.
that you're representing Malta. I mean, I do quite a few sports and
Yes.
I always know, I want to push myself further. I want to be near
Yes,
those
yes.
amazing people.
Yeah, that's it.
So I can push myself to
Exactly.
their level. And then, to a certain extent, you see other sports getting full support from the government, but then a sport like this doesn't.
I mean, I'm not saying to cut back the support from the other sports, God forbid. But, when we're there, we're holding the flag up, literally, alongside all the other flags. And you say, okay, Italy, they got a lot of support. Germany, lots of support. Switzerland, they rolled out red carpet for them. And our lot, not that much, or not at all.
A good pat on the back.
Which
maybe.
also says a lot about the passion that we have.
Yes, we still do it.
Which is very important.
We still do it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the very fact that in September I've got 6 people going up for the Europeans and they're all paying every last cent themselves. And, even the amount of training and days off they have to take to shoot and practice, I'm really proud of them. But, I'm sure they'd like a bit of help.
Mark, I think I can safely say that shooting sports have possibly the best potential for bringing awards back from international
Yes.
matches. Definitely. There is a lot of potential. If we have, because our laws are fine, perfect. The ambient is fine. The weather is fine. The language is perfect if you have to get foreigners to
Yes,
participate
true.
here. What's missing? The facility. Once the facilities are up and running, we are immediately going to see a huge increase in proficiency, in the levels that we
Yes,
are achieving. Because we'll be getting foreigners who'll be shooting here. We'll be having more people at the range practicing, shooting, more competitions. That obviously improves. This is what we really need. This is the final stage in this very long process. And once that is achieved, I think we can safely say that we reached all our objectives in sports, that is.
Yes, if I may add, one big advantage, let's say, Central European shooters have over us is that they can shoot, let's say, one big level 3 match a month. So they're at this big 300, 400 plus person match a month shooting against some really good shooters. Now we manage 2 or 3 a year, and that does hold us back. If we'd have good facilities, we'd be able to host 1 or 2 of those big matches a year in Malta. And so it won't be just the 5 or 6 of us who manage to go abroad. All the local shooters will be able to at least experience these big matches and then, go a bit further. So they'll have those guaranteed 2 big matches a year, at least in Malta. And whenever I'm abroad, I have my Malta team shirt and there's Malta on my back and the flag. And they go, oh, from Malta, very nice, When can we come and shoot in Malta? When are you going to do a big level 3 match? Come on, Clive, organize a big level 3 match. I say, sorry, gents. We just don't have the facilities to do it. And they're actually eager than we are for us to get this big range going because, they really want to come over. I mean, I have Norwegian colleagues and Swedish colleagues when I'm shooting here in winter and I put a post on Facebook. Oh, it was really cold. It was 10 degrees. You can imagine us in 10 degrees. We're fast approaching death by hypothermia. Yeah. They're going, we can't shoot because the berms, the safety walls, which are supposed to be made of soil, are frozen over, and if we shoot, the bullets will bounce off, so we can't shoot at all. Or else we're shooting and our cartridge cases, as they eject from the gun, are falling into the snow, melting into the snow, and they disappear until summer. So, they'd love to be able to come over to do training clinics here in Malta and that sort of thing. So that's a really interesting niche.
Yeah.
We're used to shooting in such bright light. We usually wear sunglasses to shoot. And a couple of weeks ago we had this match. It was an indoor match in Vienna. And we really suffered. The light levels are really low. And they're going, I can't see the targets. If I can't see them, I can't shoot. They're going, no, there they are. I'm going, not much contrast is there. They're going, oh no, this is quite good. They're used to shooting in low light levels. I'm going, this is terrible, guys, Yeah. And you just don't see your sight. And they come here and they go, oh my God, this is amazing. I mean, the mad Northern Europeans are happy to come and shoot in August in 40-degree weather.
Yeah.
This is very nice, yeah. I'm going, no. But they're happy to do it,
Clive, you mentioned that you have workshops or classes. Can you just tell me a bit more about that?
Okay, no, this is something which is separate from my IPSC regional director hat. But what I did realize is that while the clubs offer a really good service when it comes to teaching safe gun handling, in other words, how to pick up a gun and use a gun on the range without puncturing yourself or anybody else, which is really the most important thing, it was the opportunities for people who wanted to learn how to shoot correctly and get really good results were a lot more limited. So when I started, it was mostly done through YouTube. I was lucky enough, after about 3 years of slogging away on my own, that we got a very good shooter over from Italy, and he taught us a lot. And then we brought over Greg Midgley for a couple of workshops. But it took me 5 years and 100,000 rounds to reach a certain level of proficiency. Now, I can pretty much take somebody on his first day, he's never fired a shot, and he'll be shooting a nice tight group on paper. A group of shots is a batch of shots within 100 rounds. So it's really cost effective. And I used to get frustrated going to the range and seeing people splattering away at a target and dumping shots all over the place on it. And it wasn't just because, I like to see things done properly. They used to get frustrated and they'd stop coming to the range, which is really a pity, because they'd say, there's something wrong with the gun, there's something wrong with the ammunition, the sights are off, my finger's off, my eyes are off, my mood is off, something was always off. Mm. As shooters, we say we need 3 very important things. We need a good gun, good ammunition, and a good excuse. And we're really good at the third one, because we always need that good excuse. But it's a bit sad when you see people that have invested quite a lot of money in a gun, and they go home and they tell their wife or their husband, I'm not shooting very well, I think I'm going to quit. When, a couple of hours with them would really set them on the right track. And we are happy because we see the sport grow.
Let's talk a little bit about collecting. Mm-hmm. First of all, what makes a person a collector? If you're not passionate about the topic, if you don't know the background, the historic background of the item, you can never be a collector. And what is the difference between a collector and the museum curator? Practically nothing. The museum curator is paid by the state or by the institution he works for. The collector has to do it out of his own pocket. Yes. But in terms of research, I always like to quote this. Walk into any library in a museum, and if you look at the shelves, you will see that around 90% of those books were written by private collectors. Because the private collector can be very specialized in his own topic, is constantly researching, constantly studying. Private collectors can be just as good at conservation as museums, because basically our objective, again, is to conserve what we have and research it. And the role that a collector plays collectively, when you see the entire effort of all these individual collectors in every country, everybody doing his own bit, it is an incredible force. And combined with museums, that accounts for the conservation of a huge part of our heritage. Mm. Yes. So the role of the collector is extremely important in society, and there was nobody as endangered as the collector when the EU Commission published this proposal in 2015. Yes. Because that proposal, believe it or not, and when I speak about it today, some people think that, I'm imagining.
You're shooting a line.
I'm just inventing things. What the proposal said was that museums have to permanently deactivate their firearms. And when you say deactivate, it means destroy, because you cannot study a firearm that is deactivated, and freeze their collections. In other words, according to the EU Commission, history stopped on that date. Yes. And museums can't carry on building their collections and always cataloguing whatever has been developed. So really doesn't make sense. It would also have meant the confiscation of all the historic firearms owned by collectors, which is an incredible wealth. I mean, when you talk about what's in museums, and you've all been to firearms museums, I'm sure, but when you put all collectors together, what collectors own is far more than museums. Sometimes far more important than museums. So it's basically destroying what, it's heritage. Shooting sports, collecting firearms ownership, basically require good legislation, which we already have. So let's not go down that path. We don't need to. In time, yes, there will be improvements which need to be done. It's a learning curve at the end of the day. Facilities. That's it. Facilities. Once we have the proper facilities, then we can go places. And Clive can get a good result with IPSC, bullseye, whatever forms of shooting there are. If there are the facilities, you can improve your proficiency. We can have a better understanding of what the sports is about. One objective which I have is to invite people who normally have no interest in shooting, worse, have no interest, know nothing about shooting, but want to write about shooting. By all means, journalists, come over to the range, try it out, see what it's all about, and then criticize, but first try it out. Don't criticize without even knowing what it's about. Politicians, you want to write laws about gun laws, you want to make changes, fair enough. Have you ever picked up a gun? Do you know what it's like at the range? Come with us to the range, try it out, see what the discipline is about. Then you are in a much better position to legislate.